The firm of Bowen, McLeod and Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.
Hello, I'm Marcia Kavanaugh. Thanks so much for joining us. In a week dominated by the monuments controversy, we will sort through the events, including what to expect next. We'll also examine the mayor's administrative style and the impact that the controversy might have on city elections. At a time when shopping centers are facing decline, our Future Watch segment looks at specialty shopping, such as along Magazine Street. And from the legislature, we'll discuss budget and prison reform. Making quorum for us are tonight's Informed Sources: Errol, Laborde, producer of Informed Sources; Tyler Bridges, political reporter for the New Orleans Advocate; Don Ostrom, Channel 12's Future Watch reporter. And we were planning to have Jeff Adelson with the New Orleans Advocate on the panel today to talk about the monuments, because he's been covering the monument removal, but he couldn't get away because of another monument being removed. So we'll discuss the monuments among the folks who are here today. But first, we're going to start talking about the legislature, what is not happening. Go over to Tyler to talk about that, because we have a budget crisis. And is anything being done about it?
Well, there's two issues that are separate but interrelated. The first issue is, will they pass a budget for the next fiscal year, which begins July 1st? And the House, which is more conservative, wants to spend less money than is actually available. The governor and the state Senate do not support that. And the House has already passed its version of the budget. The Senate's working on it now. Can they come to agreement by June 8th, which is the final day of the legislative session? They normally do, but this year there are greater tensions. The second issue is an issue called the fiscal cliff, whereas in July 1st, 2018, $1.3 billion in temporary taxes approved last year will fall off. So they have to solve this year the budget for as of July 1st in 2017, and then the $1.3 billion fiscal cliff the following year.
Let me get you to explain something a little bit. Did you say that the Republican legislators want to spend less money than is actually available?
Correct.
Explain that.
Sure. In the last 9 years, there have been 15 mid-year budget cuts where midway through the fiscal year, which is December, January, the legislature learns that there's less money than is available, so they have to cut the budget. And that's hard to cut a budget when you're already halfway through the year. Right. So the Republicans, and the governor supports the idea, have said, let's spend actually less than is available so we'll have a cushion. The problem is, from the Democrat side and also many Republicans, is that's going to mean deep cuts in health care. And for every $200 million you cut in health care, in state money, that's a total loss of $700 million in federal money in total. So deep cuts in programs that serve the poor and serve the disabled. So the governor said, well, hey, we just can't do that. We need to spend more money. We need to raise more money. And the Republicans in the House, who have the majority, are there saying no to various tax increases. So over the next almost 3 weeks, we're going to see whether, A, they solve the budget problem for this upcoming fiscal year as of July 1st, and the bigger problem is the fiscal cliff for the following year.
Are any of these revenue-raising measures that the governor came up with, these tax proposals,
Republicans shot them all down?
None of them just even got out of committee?
Didn't even get out of committee.
What about the gasoline tax? Where is that? Is that going anywhere, an increase in the gas tax?
Right. It barely made it out of the Ways and Means Committee. It goes to the next stage, which is the full House. Remember, the House is controlled by Republicans, conservative Republicans. We're not sure if it will make it out of the House, and then if it does, it would likely pass the Senate. But again, there's a very strong anti-tax sentiment in the conservative House.
There was also, J.P. Morrell had a commission looking into tax credits and exemptions, et cetera. Are we seeing any movement in that, any sort of changes?
Not great success. Businesses which say they favor free enterprise, free markets, they actually really like their tax exemptions and tax subsidies, so they go to the mat to fight all these tax exemptions or to create even more tax exemptions. And so the legislature has shot most of those down so far as well.
Any changes in the movie tax credit?
Yeah, the state Senate passed a revamp of the program, which was really to kind of keep it going and put it on stronger financial footing. So it passed the Senate. It still has to go to the House. It's backed by the governor. It's backed by the industry. I would guess that it's going to go through. And that's very important in New Orleans because this is the place where most of the movies are made in the state. And what happens is, you know, the taxpayers subsidize the filming of these movies. The critics say that it's a bit of a boondoggle because taxpayers spend a lot of money giving money to the producers to actually film in Louisiana. And that money could be spent on hospitals, hiring more teachers, higher ed, and other things that would also benefit the state.
But then the proponents say they bring in so much more money that's what makes it worth it, correct?
That's the argument of the proponents.
That's what I look forward. So we're looking at, like you said, just under 3 weeks now, and so far there's been no movement on revenue. And oftentimes you see in the last waning hours of a legislative session, suddenly stuff gets done, and sometimes people don't even know what's in the legislation they're passing. So do we envision that sort of thing happening where just at the last minute all of these pressing issues will be addressed?
Yeah, the legislature, and maybe humans are like this in general, tends to wait till the end to do things, but it does get very messy. I'm expecting a very messy final 3 weeks, and we really don't know what's going to happen again, whether they're going to solve the budget for the upcoming year, and then beyond that, the bigger issue of this fiscal cliff, which is really a tough one. But again, Republicans are very resistant to the taxes that seem to have to go up.
Special session?
Yeah, the governor told me yesterday that he expects there will be he'll have to call another special session
this
to deal
summer,
with this.
Or will it come later in the year, you think?
Not clear when it would be.
Okay. All right, Tyler, thanks a lot. And we're going to go over to Errol now and begin our discussion about monument removal, which has had the city in grips over these past several days. We saw PGT Beauregard taken down this week, and today it is Robert E. Lee.
Yeah, I think some people were thinking if there was one chance at all, it might have been Beauregard because he was the one who was from New Orleans, and if you like to talk about cultural diversity, he was French and from Chalmette, you know. So, and he also had a fairly distinguished post-war career, but that didn't happen. It went and actually it was just beyond the statue. They took away the plaque in front of it, and what was a really nice pedestal isn't attractive at all now. It's kind of sad looking, and so it was a tough week. And last night the administration gave some guidelines where they said they'll put these statues up for bid. But if you do it, you got to be a nonprofit, and you can't have it outside, and you got to have signage saying why they were taken away in the first place. The one exception is City Park, because both the city and City Park agree that it's not quite clear who owns that land where the statue was, and so that's kind of a friendly negotiation right there, but I guess conceivably City Park would wind up with the statue. But if they can't put it inside anywhere, I'm not sure where we go in City Park, and so I'm not sure what the future for any of that is. Today, the mayor had a press conference, and you know, if this whole thing, if all these statues are about symbols, this is oozing with symbolism. It almost looked like a Republican nominating convention. First of all, they started with the national anthem and then the Pledge of Allegiance, which is very rare at a Democratic rally that you're going to see that. And then not that they don't like the national anthem, Pledge of Allegiance, but just not the style. Okay. And then they had two ministers giving invocations. And then the mayor talked, and he talked about, you know, marinating in our past. We can't be doing that. But there's something I want to mention, that during this whole argument, there's a phrase that's evolved and has been spoken more often. The mayor uses it over and over again, and it's called the cult of the lost cause. That the mayor's office has been using that, and that wasn't part of the language at the beginning of this issue. All of a sudden, people have been talking. I don't know, some professor knocked on the door one night and said, hey, look, there's this. But what that refers to is around the 1900s, some people who studied the Civil War and the post-Civil War period looked at the literature of the time, and they saw what they thought was an effort to romanticize the South and to romanticize the Civil War and to say, well, they lost, but they were noble fighters, and they were just outnumbered and to romanticize some of the characters and say that the war wasn't about slavery, it was about states' rights. And Going with the Wind was seen as sort of an example. You have these very heroic people who lost, but still. And so that phrase is used over and over and sounds sort of sinister, especially with the word cult attached to it. But it really has nothing to do with these statues. It really has nothing to do with these individuals. This cult of the lost cause thing was something that professors and authors invented years after the Civil War, but still people are talking about that as that this was the motivation, this was the reason. And if you look through history, anytime there was a movement, anytime there was an effort, there was usually some effort. There were people who were on one side who always at least sort of tried to glorify some of the people from their past. And so that's not as, that's not as uncommon, but it's just being used a lot. What's going to happen now, we'll just have to see,
Like you said, there was a press release yesterday afternoon from City Hall, and apparently there has been interest expressed about taking the monuments from some groups. So the city is going to put out an RFP for nonprofits, only nonprofits and other government groups. But one stipulation is that these monuments cannot be displayed in public in Orleans Parish on public land.
Right, and so that kind of eliminates some people, and so unless somebody's really eccentric and has a big house with a big dinner or something and wants the Beauregard statue, and I'm not quite sure where to go in Orleans Parish, the museums have pretty much passed on. There is a Civil War museum, which would be a natural place, but it's a pretty small operation. Now, supposedly
it's right around the corner from Lee
Lee
Circle.
Circle.
Yeah. Now, supposedly, the Jeff Davis home in Biloxi, it's not supposedly, that the man who's the manager, has said that he's interested in it, but which could be an answer. But on the other hand, some people in New Orleans are saying, well, no, this belongs to the city of New Orleans. And so, that might be an answer, but I think there's going to also be some resentment in the city about that, too.
So meanwhile, the statues that have been taken down, Beauregard and then parts of the Jeff Davis statue, the folks were upset to learn that they were in a storage yard, outside in a storage yard. City says that everything will be crated up and put in safe storage until the future of where these monuments will
that just
reside
aggravated
again
it.
is determined.
It just shows the power of the internet, because the next day, all over the internet was these images of Beauregard, this very noble-looking statue in the scrapyard, and that just kind of hurt a lot of people.
An issue that has stirred really fierce emotions and continues to do so. Thanks a lot, Errol.
Including in Baton Rouge this week with a vote in the State House to require a public vote, and the African American legislators got very emotional in opposing that, and when it was approved by the House, they then walked out.
Right.
Well, it wasn't going to get past the Senate anyway, and so it almost wasn't worth the commotion. Also wanted to mention businessman Frank Stewart, who we should mention has been supportive of the station, but he had a couple of letters out today. He's been very passionate about this, and then early in the week, Ben Baggert, who's a former state senator, also had a letter trying to defend Beauregard and his legacy, and these were like full-page ads in the Advocate.
Okay, continuing conversation about that. Let's go over to Dawn now, and we'll talk a little bit lighter subject, and that is shopping. Don't we all like to shop? But shopping's changing.
Shopping is changing, and I know you all spoke last week. Part of the internet hurting shopping, and big box stores and strip malls around the country facing Macy's and Sears and Kmart closings. Lakeside Mall, on the flip side, actually doing very well, 98% occupied, with new stores coming into the mall. Announced today that they're getting ready to undergo a $10 million renovation to their public areas, where the food court is and anywhere throughout the mall. Spending $10 million over the next 3 years can't be a sign that they're doing poorly. Mm-hmm. And we have just in New Orleans.
It could be a sign, though, that they figure they got to do something differently, though.
Do something, but to be 98% full means people are paying their rent and actually occupying their spaces, which is a good thing. But in this region, we just have eclectic things. Over the last 3 to 5 years, Magazine Street has taken on really national prominence as a place to shop. And I'm sure we all on this panel have had someone come to visit and say, I've heard about Magazine Street, where do I go? And you kind of give them that look like, well, it's 6 miles long. You can't just go stroll this, And I had the president of the Magazine Street Merchants Association tell me this week, people go to Los Angeles and they know to go to Rodeo Drive, and you walk that 2 or 3 blocks and you're finished with Rodeo Drive. Here in New Orleans, we have Magazine Street, and it stretches 6 miles long and is very healthy by most counts. the Merchants Association there does 3 annual events. One is Merriment on Magazine, one is Art for Art's Sake, and one is the Champagne Stroll, which occurred last weekend. And they said they had more of a crowd than they've ever had. Their Merriment on Magazine event, which is during the Christmas holiday time, is over a period of 5 weeks. And last year their promo for that was "Don't get mauled," like don't go to the mall. But those 2 entities, the malls and the Magazine Street, Ferret Street, Oak Street, now South Market District, don't really completely compete with each other because they're not offering the same thing. New Orleans is very unique in that eclectic feel, the personal touch, things made locally, and it's still very successful. There is a push for national retailers to come in along Magazine Street, and we've seen some of them come in over the years. You know, at first, Whole Foods coming in was a huge uproar, but West Elm is in. Jamba Juice actually just had to close down, though. We mixed food and retail on Magazine. But that wasn't for lack of interest along Magazine Street. It was construction along Louisiana Avenue, making it very difficult to get to that part of Magazine Street.
But remember the Walmart, the fears that the Walmart was going to destroy Magazine Street, and yet Magazine Street has thrived.
And so has Walmart. So actually that's what the president, we mentioned Walmart in our discussion this week, and he said, you get different things. You don't go in and get personal service in a gift-wrapped item, and you go to Magazine Street to find the thing you didn't know you were looking for, or to find something. You go to the internet if you know exactly what you want.
Looking for. The Magazine Street is certainly a lot of fun to take friends down too. Absolutely. Thanks a lot, Don. Okay, back over to Tyler right now, and it's sort of still in this monuments vein.
Right.
And of course, this was the mayor's will. I mean, he wanted to do this. Mitch Landrieu did. And talking about the mayor and his style, it really sort of harks back to his re-election. People were talking about his style.
Yeah, that was one of the reasons that Michael Bagneris, remember, who was his main opponent, talked about Mitch's style, the mayor's style. So I call him Mitch because I've known him so long. In fact, I wrote a story several years ago about this, and when I interviewed the mayor, and I raised questions, and I said, there are people who believe that your approach is it's my way or the highway, that you just do not brook any dissent. If somebody is not with you, if they're not with you, you think they are against you. And he disputed a lot of that, but much of his argument comes to the point, basically, is that if you want to make an omelet, you got to break some eggs. And I did this, and this, and this, and this, and it requires strong leadership, and when you do that, some people are going to get upset. And I guess he would probably say the same thing. His point of view would probably, it took strong leadership to take down these monuments.
And certainly there are those who would agree with that and have written that. I mean, all of us, of course, have been looking at comments posted on social media or whatever, and I certainly have seen a lot of comments to that effect, that it's really taken a strong person to take this stance, somebody like Mayor Landrieu. However, there's the flip side, too, of those saying, well, that's the problem with this whole thing, is that, he made this decision, a lot of people feel, and there wasn't enough input from the people of this community.
Yeah, and I think there's an additional factor that may be at work. A couple of reports recently have said that Mayor Landrieu, who is term limited in 2018, he's only got 1 more year to serve, may be eyeing 2020 as a presidential run. The idea that he could be elected mayor is pretty slim. But if you run for mayor, if you run for president, it'd be pretty slim. But if you run for president, at least you're in the conversation. Maybe you have some impact. Maybe you could be a vice president, be a cabinet secretary, and certainly this issue, the monuments, has given the mayor national exposure. He had a piece in the Washington Post. Cable networks have been calling him. He's been quoted in national publications. And so this issue has given him an opportunity to have something of a national exposure. And certainly if he travels around the country, it's an issue he could talk about.
And certainly as far as the Democrats are concerned, it's sort of a wide open slate right now. I mean, who is going to rise to
It gives them a niche as a liberal Democrat from the South. Okay, and there's with big city experiences, so there's not too many of those out there, and so that's a niche. You just wonder about the electability. I mean, because the trend is more, and then, with the voters looking for in the opposite direction.
Well, you can always point to Donald Trump and say, who knows, when there's a presidential election, who might emerge?
Right. Really, what is the norm right now in terms of elections?
The norm is anything not normal.
Yeah, right. So, Errol, also, I know that you already did talk, you touched on the cult of the lost cause and sort of gave us a background about that, but still with the monuments and continuing this discussion too about future elections, the way this all has been handled here in the city of New Orleans, in the parish of Orleans, facing city elections this fall, selecting a new mayor, selecting new council, what kind of impact does this controversy, do you think it's going to have?
I think it's going to have an impact on politics for years to come, even though it may not be an impact that's measurable, because it's not going to be that there's going to be one candidate that's for a monument and the other one's anti-monuments, and then pick between the two as in terms of Landrieu. I don't think it's going to be that. I don't think the nature of the campaign and the campaign field is. I would guess, though, that the candidates, there's a lot of middle ground on this. I saw one of the stations, I think it was Channel 4, interviewed Michael Bagnaris, and Michael Bagnaris said, look, why are we wasting so much time on dead people? Let's talk about the issues we have right now. Yeah, I think any candidate will tell you we should be talking about crime and we should be talking about the streets. The thing is that crime really isn't an issue. Everybody's pretty much on the same side on that. Everybody's against it, all right? And everybody knows that we need more police, and everyone knows that the solutions are all long-term solutions. Now exactly how you implement those, I guess, is what makes the difference between one person and the other. And I think it's the same thing with streets. It's the question of getting funding. This particular issue, in terms of the day-to-day safety and lives of people, wasn't that type of issue. But it was an issue that had an emotional impact because throughout history, there's been this situation, there's been this kind of issue out there where you have a group of people in a society, which you might call your natives, your native middle class, who feel that they're being threatened. Okay, that they're losing authority and they're losing power. That was what happened back in the days of the machine politics, when you had all of these, when you had an influx of immigrants came in, all of a sudden the native middle class says, well, these people have all the political power now, we're losing out. I think that was part of the attraction of Donald Trump. I think people felt that we're losing. I mean, so much of the support was among white males, and they said, we're losing strength in this community. And I think overall that there are a lot of people who kind of felt all this was sort of like in their face. And for all of the stuff about the cult of the lost cause, there were a lot of people who liked the monuments just because they grew up in New Orleans and they saw those monuments all their lives, and it was part of their backdrop. And not once did it have anything to do with the Civil War or slavery or anything else, but it was just part of their life. It'll
be interesting to see 50 years from now how history looks back at this time that seems so polarizing. Will it be a defining moment for the city of New Orleans or not? My guess is not.
Well, history won't know what the view was like driving up Esplanade Avenue towards City Park and seeing this great statue of a guy on a horse. It was a beautiful view, and with the with the museum in the background, and I think those endearing characteristics of the city is really what was concerning people, and not all this other stuff, that they dug off. And so I think that's going to affect political attitudes. It's going to affect what party people register with. And it may not affect this election, but it may affect the election after that. So
that's yet another question, too. What happens to that pedestal where PGT Beauregard once was, with his horse, his magnificent horse? When you drive up to it now, it really looks like an above-ground tomb that's been vandalized. It's not a pretty sight. So hopefully something will be done soon to address that. Okay.
And that might be part of the negotiation with City Park.
Yeah. All right, we're going back over to Tyler. One more thing, look at the legislature, and certainly a real big push was prison reform and changes in sentencing.
Yeah.
You did an absolutely beautiful piece that's in the Washington Post about older inmates who had committed violent crimes, and the governor wanted to see if we could change legislation to release some of these people because they're not considered really dangerous anymore. That failed, and you talked to some of those folks.
Yeah, just to say what the governor is trying to do, and it's not just him. There's a very interesting coalition of groups. It includes the Koch brothers on the right, includes the ACLU, it includes the Southern Poverty Law Center, and they are pushing a package of bills, 10 in all. Louisiana is the biggest jailer in the country, some people even say in the world, on a per capita basis. And the effort, and there was a study done that showed here are the ways that maybe it's not a good idea to put these people in a prison or put them in for this long. So the various recommendations to try to, the governor says actually these changes would make the state safer because so many of the people go into prison come out again and commit more crimes. And so the idea is to have a lot of programs to retrain people, get them away from drugs, mental health, train them for new jobs, all sorts of things. And one piece of it was the piece that I focused on, particularly in this piece that I wrote for the Washington Post, which again is these geriatrics. So I went to Angola, and they took me to the nursing unit. And I felt like I was in an old folks' home, and the people that I talked to, the men that I interviewed, had committed terrible crimes, murder, rape with a weapon, but they are now very old. They're very frail. The district attorneys blocked the governor's proposal that these geriatrics would be eligible for release. Those who committed, who were in prison for second-degree murder or aggravated rape. The DA said these people are still too dangerous. We made promises to the victims that they would remain locked up for life. Louisiana is an outlier in keeping these folks locked up. There's only, I think, one or two other states that do this. But I interviewed these old people, and again, one guy I talked to is 72-year-old, and he's blind. Another guy who had committed murder or second-degree murder many years ago, he can barely move, and yet he's still in prison.
So basically the governor said, okay, we'll take that off the table so that some of these other reform measures can get through.
Yeah, the big changes that have now passed the state Senate, they're now going to the state House, would deal with what are called the non-violent offenders, people particularly in for drugs or theft of property. And Louisiana is an outlier in that, putting them in prison much longer than other states.
But Tyler, do these people, like the blind man and the guy, do they have any place to go? Is there somebody?
Or people to care for them.
Yeah, somebody to care for them.
Yeah, obviously they would only be released if they did, and this issue is to give them the eligibility to go somewhere else. And the benefit for the state is the state right now pays for all their medical costs. These old people costs are expensive.
But conceivably, couldn't the federal government then have to take over their costs?
The federal government would take over their costs once they are released, and that's what produces the savings for the state. And then the governor says, let's reinvest that money. Again, that part is not moving forward, but it looks like it's going to move forward. The change is dealing with the non-violent offenders. Again, Louisiana is #1 in incarceration in the country.
And so there would be some changes in sentencing.
Yeah.
That's going to be for these non-violent offenses, which would mean less people in jail. All right, Tyler, thanks. All right, folks, it's time to look ahead now.
Well, we're speaking about City Park, and some good news from City Park. Tomorrow morning, there's going to be the groundbreaking for the new Children's Museum. If you know where Christian Brothers School is, sort of like down the road a piece is where it's going to be. I've seen the architectural sketches for it, and I predict that when it's done, it's going to be a really architecturally significant piece of architecture in the nation.
You said architecture twice within the same sentence, but that's
okay.
It's in a great spot.
It's going to be that impressive.
Tyler.
Yeah, I'll be continuing to cover the legislature in Baton Rouge for the Advocate. It'll be really the last 3 weeks, a little less than 3 weeks. It's going to be a particularly compressed time period where they're going to try to get a lot of done. Will they get it done on the budget, taxes? We don't know.
Burning the midnight oil, perhaps?
Very soon.
Okay, done.
Speaking of architecturally curious, the 40,000 square foot arcade restaurant Dave & Buster's opens downtown on Monday. Dave & Buster's does very well elsewhere around the country. We'll see what New Orleans thinks of it.
Are your
At
kids
Loyola
already?
and Poydras. Actually, it's an arcade for grown-ups, not kids.
It's not for kids?
It's not for kids.
For big kids. All right, guys, thanks a lot for being here. Thank you all for joining us, and we want to see you again next week for Informed Sources. Have a good evening.
The firm of Bowen, McLeod & Britt helps both large corporations and small businesses with insurance, risk management, and employee benefits using the same values they've held true for over 30 years: knowledge, vision, accountability, and service. More information is at bmbinc.com.